It starts connecting. Webinar is live. We are recording. So we will start to see, I'm seeing attendees come in. Great. We'll give people a few moments to get in, and then I'll do a little introduction.
So they don't see us yet?
They do.
Oh.
Yeah, they can. Everybody can hear us. So they're flowing in. I'm just going to give 1 or 2 minutes to let people get settled in, and then we'll begin. Let's see if it keeps going. Great. Well, we're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I know folks will keep coming in, but I'll just introduce myself and give a little housekeeping and how this is going to go today. I'm really excited by how many people joined us. So this is just fantastic. So thank you for taking your time today to join us to do this. My name's Denise, and I head up donor stewardship at MALT. And I'm really excited about this topic, again, about this series. You know, it happens to be one of the most asked questions. What is a conservation easement that we get? So I really love that we could take the time to do a better job to explain how we do our work, what tools we use and why, and gather together our experts, our staff experts, outside experts to address these topics and just do a better job explaining things. So I hope you'll enjoy this intimate talk. And I want to hear from all of you during this presentation. Do you like this format? Are there other topics that we could cover? We have a chat box. We also have the Q&A box. So pop your questions into the Q&A for our panelists. And we have some great MALT staffers behind the scenes that are answering questions for us. Eager to answer your questions. Hopefully we'll get to all of them if they're not addressed in the talk today. I'm going to try to save 5 to 10 minutes after our talk just to address a few live questions. So feel free to pop them in. And I set up a little survey at the end. Once we close out the talk, they'll pop up in the browser. It's like 4 questions, and it gives you the opportunity to put in what other topics you'd like to hear us cover. Did you like the time of the day? You know, how did we do? We want to hear back from you. This is interactive. We want to do better. We're here to serve. We're here to educate and just reach out. So please take the opportunity. We want to hear from you. So in starting this, I'm a very visual person. And I got really excited when I thought we could join together with a visual note taker, or what's known as a graphic recorder, to help illustrate this talk. And so I want to welcome Emma from Ink Factory. She's based in Chicago. Emma, thanks for joining us. And as you can see, the screen in front of you will be where her visual notes will come to life as we do this talk. So thanks, Emma. Appreciate you being here. Let's see, we got a lot of participants have come in. So great. Now I'd like to introduce the 2 people, the MALT staffers that are so knowledgeable about this topic. And I'm really I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you taking the time. Both of you have such full plates right now. MALT has an exciting year ahead. And having you, Catherine, join us, our Director of Conservation, and Brady, our Associate Director of Conservation and Acquisition. I can't think of 2 better people to talk about this tool and help us better understand. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Well, Catherine, why don't you kick it off and give us a little bit of background, share a bit about your background and how you came to MALT. And mostly because you're such a passionate person, I want to hear more of why you have such a passion for this work.
Well, first I want to thank everybody that's joined us. This is one of my very favorite topics, and I can't tell you how much it delights me to know that folks are interested in hearing about it. I am MALT's Director of Conservation, so I oversee both the easement acquisition program and also our stewardship and sustainable management work. Today we're going to talk about our easement acquisitions. I began my career as a lawyer. I worked with local governments and public agencies to finance real estate projects that had public benefit. And during the 10 years that I practiced law, I learned a lot about land use law, real estate finance, and public law. And most importantly, I gained a deep appreciation about how public policy and our local laws can help encourage certain publicly beneficial land uses. And I left practicing law about 20 years ago. And since then, I've been working to protect California's agricultural land. I've done that with land trusts, with nonprofits, and also with the California Department of Conservation. So I've devoted my career to agricultural conservation because I believe very strongly in the power of place. When my children were small, we belonged to a community garden that we worked in, and I could see how growing food, being close to the earth and watching the seasons change have provided my children with this very powerful sense of place. And I believe that eating local food and living around farms and ranches provides all of us in our community with a sense of place, a sense of history, and a sense of culture.
I love that sense of place. Such good words. Great. Brady, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and if you don't mind sharing your passion for the work we're doing.
Sure. So hello, my name is Brady Moss. I'm the Associate Director of Conservation for Acquisitions, and I'm fairly new to MALT. I've been here almost 9 months. My land conservation background began about 20 years ago when I started working with the National Land Conservation Organization, the Trust for Public Land, based nearby in San Francisco. And some of my first land conservation projects were right here in the North Bay in the city of Petaluma along the Petaluma River. But most of my work at TPL was in Southern California, even though, I have to put a pitch in, I'm a proud Northern Californian, born and raised in the far north of Shasta County. But after working down south, I now feel a stronger connection to the natural landscapes across the entire state of California. So my professional conservation path started with conserving land for the purpose of creating parks and open space. And since then, I've done further conservation work as an environmental consultant within the private sphere and also working in the public sector with the California Natural Resources Agency. And then last spring, a consulting opportunity emerged for me here at MALT, which I was very excited to explore. And that eventually turned into a full-time opportunity. And I'm very excited to be here at MALT working on agricultural land conservation.
Well, we're really lucky to have both of you. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Catherine, why don't you dive in? Let's get to it. What is a conservation easement?
Well, I'm going to start by talking very briefly about how important California agriculture is and why it is so important for us to protect California agriculture. California is one of only 6 places on the globe that has a Mediterranean climate that can support a tremendous diversity of fruits, vegetables, and grains. And in fact, California grows about 40% of the nation's fruits and vegetables. So I would suggest that protecting California farmland is a matter of our national food security. We actually export about 25% of the food we grow in California. And so I would further argue it's a matter of global importance. In recent years too, since I started working in this field, we've really come to understand how important our working lands are to adapting to climate change. And in particular, our grasslands, Marin is mostly rangeland and grassland, is particularly important. Globally, grasslands account for about 1/3 of the stored soil carbon. And California has a great deal of grazing land, and that grazing land has significant potential to increase carbon sequestration with good management. So climate change is become a more important reason for us to conserve agricultural land. Unfortunately, in California, we're losing about 50,000 acres of agricultural land a year So this work that MALT is doing to protect farm and ranch land is urgent and essential. So I'm going to provide you with a little bit of background about conservation easements, and Brady's going to dive into the details a little bit. So some historical perspective. When Europeans came to California, they brought with them the concept of private property. And of course, our property, we have a nation that's based on, has private property rights. However, as time has passed, and particularly in the last century, we've adopted federal, state, and local laws that limit private property rights to protect the public and to provide public good. So when we think about it at a very local level, our zoning laws require that our land be developed in a rational manner. Our state, federal, and local environmental laws ensure that our land, private land, is used in ways that protect our health, our water, and our natural resources. And we also, our governments provide us with parks and with public lands that allow all of the citizens to have access and experience special places and open spaces. So, however, as we know, our laws are enacted by elected representatives, and consequently, our laws reflect the current will of the people. And if that will of the people changes, the protections that are provided by those laws might also change as well. So conservation easements provide us with another tool that we can use to protect natural and agricultural resources for the public good. And rather than being a restriction that's imposed by a government, a conservation easement is a voluntary agreement between a nonprofit like MALT and a landowner, a private property owner. And as Brady will explain in more detail, the conservation easement protects natural and agricultural land in perpetuity, so forever, and can't be changed later. So it's a more permanent protection than our federal, state, and local laws. Conservation easements have been used in the United States since the 1940s. They were first developed, interestingly enough, to provide scenic areas along the new highways that were being developed in the 30s and 40s. And they were expanded primarily in the early days, as I said, protect scenic areas and also habitat and natural resources. But 40 years ago, MALT was the first organization in the nation to take the tool of a conservation easement and use it to protect agricultural land. So 40 years later, land trusts all around the nation protect lots of different kinds of agricultural land, from the rangelands of West Marin, the prairies of the Midwest, are intensely, cultivated food-producing areas like the Central Valley and the Salinas Valley, and agricultural conservation easements have become a commonly used tool. MALT is a particularly exciting place to work as an agricultural conservationist because the tool was developed here. And because MALT has got a head start on everybody else, the organization holds conservation easements on half of the privately owned land in West Marin. So this is a very exciting, innovative, and kind of ahead of the curve organization to be working for.
Great, that was really good. Why are they necessary? Why are conservation easements necessary?
Well, I think they're necessary first because we know how important agricultural land is to our future, to our food security, to our ability to adapt to climate change, and to our cultural and spiritual well-being in creating a sense of place. And because because the laws that we enact are not forever, conservation easements give us an opportunity to protect those resources that are so important, not only to us, but to future generations in perpetuity or forever.
That's great. Brady, why don't you get into how this tool works? Like, get into the meat of it for us.
Sure. So MALT's primary tool has been the agricultural conservation easement. And one way to describe an agricultural conservation easement is that it's a voluntary agreement. It's an agreement in which a landowner takes their right to develop their property and may sell that right to MALT in the form of a conservation easement deed in exchange, usually for a cash payment or potentially partial donation. And then MALT takes those development rights and we extinguish them by not exercising those rights. So we effectively conserve the land's agricultural and conservation values by keeping the land as productive farmland and wildlife habitat. And after the easement is placed on a property, the property owner retains the right to own and manage their land in compliance with the easement, and the land continues to be used for farming and ranching. And one important aspect of MALT's conservation easements is that as Catherine mentioned, they're established in perpetuity, and that they remain in effect on the land forever, regardless of ownership changes. The easement is reported on title. So if a property is ever sold, MALT's conservation easement will transfer with the land to the next owner, legally binding them to its terms. And this is how MALT helps farmland stay farmland forever. And when we say that a MALT easement extinguishes development rights, it means that certain land uses, certain forms of development are prohibited. So non-agricultural residential development, commercial development, even subdividing the land, and any other uses or practices that are seen as detrimental to agriculture and the natural resource values are prohibited. So yeah, and I'll also note that MALT's easements go beyond just protecting land from development, because we have a requirement that protected properties have to continue operating as working farmland. And we do this by putting a provision in our conservation easements called an MAU, also known as a mandatory agricultural use. And this stipulates that either the owner of the property or a leasee operator, they must engage the land in productive agriculture. And MALT does this because though our mission is to conserve farmland, our vision is to preserve the agricultural economy of Marin. So that's why we mandate ongoing agricultural use. And I will briefly mention that there are many other co-benefits for MALT's conservation easements other than just conserving farmland and the agricultural economy. And some of those benefits include creating wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors, contributing to water quality, and many climate benefits.
You know, one of the most frequent questions I also hear is, how do you establish a value on an easement? And maybe even this, if you talk a little bit about the transaction development, that might be very interesting.
Sure. So easements are valued by a real estate appraiser. The appraisal will establish a monetary value for the conservation easement, and that value will become the purchase price that MALT can pay. And I won't go into extreme detail of how the appraiser arrives at value, but essentially it's as simple as this. The appraiser will do an analysis of the property's current value on the market, its highest and best use. And they'll compare that to an analysis of the property when it's valued as farmland, theoretically restricted by MALT's easement. And the difference between those two values is considered to be the value of the development rights, and hence the value of the conservation easement. So that's how the easement value is established, and how a MALT transaction is developed. It all starts with an application. So a property owner has to submit to us information about their land, such as the nature of their agricultural operations, why they're seeking an easement, and many other details. And then MALT staff assess the application according to our criteria. We want to know things like, will the easement advance MALT's mission? And does the property have the capacity to support ongoing productive agricultural use? And assuming it passes those initial tests, MALT will then do a site evaluation. We'll tour the property, interview the landowners. We'll also do a review of title to determine if there are any issues affecting the property that could delay or prevent an easement project from succeeding, things like certain types of third-party mineral rights. And we'll also begin thinking about how our easement will be custom tailored to fit the specific property, essentially adapting our conservation easement to consider the most effective conservation strategy that could fit that piece of land. And if all of that is successful, and if we receive authorization from our board to proceed, then a number of things occur. Number one is we start looking for funding to pay for the easement. And MALT has a fantastic track record of winning public grants from federal, state, and local programs that are specifically designed to conserve farmland. But these public funders typically require MALT to provide matching funds. So that's why our supporters and MALT's fundraising staff are so important, because MALT needs to bring money to the table to provide those matching funds in order to get public funds. And earlier I mentioned the appraisal. At the same time we're looking for funding to pay for the conservation easement, we're simultaneously commissioning an appraisal. And once the appraisal is completed and we have a fair market value dollar figure for the conservation easement, we'll need to get the property owner to approve that value, as well as any public funder. And if all parties approve, then we have a deal. Then we can move forward toward escrow and closing the transaction. And keep in mind that entire process can take 1 to 2 years and potentially more if thorny issues emerge that need to be solved. And once the conservation easement transaction closes and the landowner is compensated and MALT owns a conservation easement on the land, then MALT assumes an obligation to monitor and manage that conservation easement in perpetuity. And at a minimum, that involves annual monitoring to ensure that the landowner is in compliance with the terms of an easement. So that's there's a thumbnail sketch of how a MALT conservation easement transaction develops.
It's so many moving parts. It reminds me of I've seen how you guys all work. It's like a shell game. You're juggling when the funding's going to come in and when maybe an appraisal's ready. And it's not like this turnkey template type of thing. Every single thing is tailored to that project, and it's got to line up at the right time. So I know right now you have about 7 active projects in the pipe for the coming 2 years, and which we're so excited about. But it gives me insight into your world, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many moving parts. So thank you for that explanation. Let's see. Catherine, Brady kind of referenced that every farm and transaction has a story, that's tailored to the property's characteristics. Could you speak to some of those characteristics, maybe in a current project or something that's going on that you'd like to share?
I'd love to. And I think that is, it is the story. Every project, every real estate transaction is a story. And as Brady said, every farm and ranch in Marin County is absolutely unique. It has unique agricultural and natural resources. There's a unique farming or ranching operation occurring on that land. And there's a special family story also associated. And I think I'd just like to note how that, for many families, the decision to put a conservation easement on their land and to protect it permanently, eliminate the development rights, is one of the most important financial and business decisions that a family makes in a generation. So each transaction is very, very important to an individual property owner. And consequently, MALT works very, very closely. We have 40 years of relationships with property owners in West Marin. That's something we're very proud of. It's a very important part of our work, is to develop and nurture those relationships. So we work closely with each easement applicant to tailor their easement to their property's unique characteristics, their specific agricultural operation, and their plans for the future, because the agreement will control the use of the property in perpetuity. So I'd love to talk briefly about an example, and one that may be known to many of you who travel through West Marin or live in West Marin, and that's Black Mountain Ranch. MALT has had agricultural conservation on the iconic Black Mountain Ranch since 1993. The ranch, which is almost 1,200 acres, is home to a diversity of agricultural producers right now. The dense grass on the hillsides of Black Mountain are grazed by beef cattle that are raised by Stemple Creek. The farm is the home to two vegetable producers, small vegetable producers, both Little Wing Farm and Tabletop Farm. And those farms provide our community with fresh vegetables, with fresh flowers, and with eggs, both through their farm stands and through their CSA programs. I think it's particularly interesting that both of the vegetable producers are new, young farmers, and Little Wing is actually a farm that is managed and run by an all-women's team. We also work with all the agricultural producers to improve their water systems and assist them with sustainable management techniques. I myself am an avid home seamstress, so I particularly love the fact that Black Mountain Ranch is the home of Fiber Shed, which is a partner organization of MALT, a nonprofit that is devoted to promoting climate beneficial fiber production. And actually Fiber Shed has their innovative fiber dye garden there at Black Mountain Ranch, which is exciting. You can take classes there in fiber arts and fiber dyeing. And of course, in addition to its agricultural resources, Black Mountain Ranch has amazing natural resources, just rich riparian areas. It's a home to Marin's native plants and animals, and an important watershed as well.
And I think I think our comms team is working on a great story that's going to come out in our spring newsletter in March. So look for more on that. It is just a fantastic story for property that so long ago we put an easement on, but how the work continues with our SAP projects there and all the wonderful opportunities for younger people to be having a chance to work on this land.
Yeah.
So that was great. One other question that I get a lot too, and I know, I think a lot of you out there know that we work with partners. We can't do this work alone. And I think just having a little, if you'd like to speak to that, Catherine or Brady, a little bit about the really key partners who help us do our work would be great.
Well, indeed, we do. We cannot do our work alone, and we work in a community of partners. It is also one of the things that makes our work really interesting and satisfying. Of course, our most important partners are Marin's farmers and ranchers, and we've talked a little bit about our relationship with them. Brady talked a little bit about the fact that when we do a conservation easement, our partnership with the agricultural farmers and ranchers is just beginning, because we work with them then for forever to ensure that the easement is upheld and help them with the sustainable management of their land. We work with lots of other professionals, so appraisers, attorneys, and folks, rangeland consultants that help us create agricultural management plans to protect our creek areas, and also carbon farming plans. And then finally, as Brady mentioned, MALT leverages all private donations by very actively seeking federal, state, and local funding for our easements. Generally, we try to fund at least half of an easement purchase price with public funding. I'll note that the state of California has some very innovative agricultural conservation funding that particularly protects agricultural land for its climate beneficial results. Also in Marin County, Measure A that's adopted by the voters also helps us protect agricultural land.
That's great. That's great. I think we're hitting about 30 minutes, which is perfect. And I want to jump into some of the questions that were coming up. One from Tom in Oakland, he really, we're protecting private farmland, but he really wanted to hear more. What are the public benefits of the work we do?
I'm really glad that Tom asked that question. And I think it's really important to talk about since we are protecting private land. The work that we do and the preservation of agricultural land benefits all of us, everybody in our society. As we've talked about, local agricultural land provides us with a fresh local source of food. Rangeland that in West Marin sequesters carbon and protects our native plants and animals as well. Because I think MALT has a special role, a special opportunity, because we do have easements on half of the privately held land in West Marin. That kind of large landscape level protection allows us to really focus on protecting wildlife corridors and reaping the climate change benefits of a landscape level protection. I'll also note that protecting our agricultural land also protects local jobs and stimulates our local agricultural economy. And I guess the last thing I would say, myself, I've been coming to West Marin. I grew up in Davis. Traveling to West Marin was something my family did all the time. And so for me, one of the most important benefits, and I suspect for many of you, it is that the continuation of Marin agriculture for me provides me with a very, very direct sense of place and history and culture as well.
That's great. We have another great question from Rich in Nicasio. What happens to the easement if MALT ceases to exist? Can the easement be canceled or changed by joint agreement between property owner and MALT since it is in private agreement?
Catherine, you want to take that, or should I take a shot at that?
I'm happy to take it and say that all of our easements have a provision in it that if MALT ceases to exist, that the easement will be transferred to another qualified entity, another entity that has the power and the authority and the capacity to manage the easement. The easement cannot be canceled except in rare cases of impossibility. So it is an agreement that is recorded against the land, and the way that it's drafted, it's extremely difficult for it to cancel.
Great, that's good. Another one from Mike. Could MALT potentially sell the development rights in the future?
Brady, would you like to take that one?
I can bet. So maybe in some theoretical way, possibly, but I would say this, because most of our easements are at least partially funded by public funding entities, the money that we're using typically has significant strings attached. It was generated by, for example, bond measures that had rules with what that money, how that money would be used. And so So I believe that if MALT were ever to try to sell the development rights, it would be in violation of the funding programs that we utilize to acquire these. And so I'm going to say, I mean, Catherine, maybe you have an example, especially with your legal background. I don't know if there's a way MALT could to sell our development rights.
I think the answer is no. And for the reasons that Brady outlined, and also because it's MALT's mission to permanently protect the land. So that is what we do, is extinguish those development rights.
That's great. Nancy has a question. How do MALT easements incorporate environmental considerations such as wildlife corridors? This is a great one to talk about.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best way to answer that is to really emphasize that we consider the unique attributes of each property. All of our easements have special provisions protecting all riparian and creek areas. And so there's a creek creek conservation management plan associated with all of our modern easements. We are very, while we're protecting agricultural land, it is with a very strong emphasis on protecting natural resources as well. We have a stewardship staff of 5 or 6 people who are all environmental scientists, and that is what they do, is grassland ecology. So we have the best possible minds thinking about how we can protect natural resources at the same time that agriculture is ongoing.
That's great. And maybe we have time for one more. Brady, someone wants to ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges to the work?
Wow, challenges to the work. Well, let's say my mind goes to title issues, and I can't be too specific but let's just say there are many things that can interfere with the conservation easement project moving forward. Like I'll just say, for example, some of these properties, some of these ranches have been owned for like 100 years or more. And so when we look at title, it could be that some of these properties may not have what we call, legal access. They can have physical access. There may be roads going from public roads to their property, but if you were to look on title to see if there are actual, access easements where they legally have the right to be passing through another person's property to get to their own, that may not exist. And so, and that could matter in a few ways. One, if an appraiser is going to value that property and they stumble upon this, they can see that the land is effectively landlocked, there is no legal access to it, that affects the value. That if you were to market that property, a landlocked property is not going to be worth as much as a property with legal access. And so the landowner is likely not, if they're typically motivated, they're probably not going to want to sell a conservation easement if it's going to be valued as low as it would be valued if it were a landlocked property. So that's just an example. So let's say title issues can emerge. Something also could interfere with this, I would say, is funding. It's not always, MALT, I think, we have a great track record of getting public funding for our properties, but that is all, there are a finite amount of those programs and they're not insured. So there are a number of aspects of a transaction that can be problematic to delay or prevent a project from moving forward.
Right. There's a lot, part of that juggling that's constantly happening for you. Yeah, a lot of challenges. I think we have time for one more question and then we'll wrap it up. I have to say, I'm crazy about this drawing. This is so fun.
Yeah.
This is fun as you've been speaking and what's coming out and just these. So Emma, thank you. It's been really fun. One more question. What would happen if the agricultural practice on conserved land is unable to produce sufficient profits to keep the owners solvent? So what if their business was starting to really, does MALT play a role in any of this?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that I'm going to say first and foremost that our focus is on the land and protecting the land So the land is available for agriculture. The easement itself is a cash payment. And so it can be a very, very important tool for a family, a financial tool for a family. Agricultural conservation easements are often used to support a number of different financial strategies. It can be used to help pay estate taxes. It can be used to help buy out siblings that aren't interested in farming and ranching. It can also be used, the conservation easement proceeds can also be used to invest in new agricultural operations. So for instance, we've seen in Marin and Sonoma, where there's been a lot of agricultural conservation easements, that land that where the property owners put their land in easement were often the lands where they were able to diversify and create value-added production that's higher value and has, you know, cheese making, organic milk and yogurt and that kind of thing. And so I would say the primary result financially is to really support farmers and ranchers and in their ability to really adapt their agricultural operations to current economic conditions.
Yeah, that's great. You know, and I have to say, I want to ask one more that came in that was really good, but can you give an idea of like the time and money investment to close a property, you know, from start to finish? And I know they're all different, but I think that's really valuable to share.
Brady, I think that one's for you.
Well, sorry, the question, not staff time, but meaning like what are the...
No, I think staff time too.
I think that's the part people.
Yeah, what does it take?
Well, so I've been at MALT almost 9 months, have yet to close an easement, so I can't say I've seen the life cycle, but I think I'd have to talk to our the accounting folks at MALT to ask them how many hours go into it. But yeah, so what's the
Well, I think Brady, you just I'm suggesting you might want to think about your SALC budget.
Got it. Well, let's say with a recent grant from the state of California for the Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, we're in the process of executing a grant agreement, and we put in, I think, at least 100. Well, this isn't going to equate. Let's say close to $10,000 for. Let's say I think with 2 staff, close to $15,000. Yeah. So there's one, and that doesn't incorporate the costs of our agricultural management plan. Catherine mentioned the creek conservation area management plans, our baseline documentation report. I mean, this may sound kind of technical, but these are all things that go into easements, the cost of the appraisal, the cost to do an environmental site assessment to make sure there are no toxics issues. So there are lots of costs in addition to staff time. So yeah, but we had to do a little bit of number crunching to come up with a good figure.
Yeah, and I think maybe we'll cover that in funding models. You know, that's something that we're hoping to, if people have interest in this, to really break it down and talk about the different ways of what it really costs. It's not just the cost of the easement to a landowner, but that bigger picture of what it takes to get there. So hopefully we'll do that in our funding 101. But in, you know, wrapping up, this was amazing, and I thank you guys so much. This is really just the beginning part of MALT's story. You know, I hope that our next one in March, we're going to cover a little bit more and get deeper into how we steward the land. How does the conservation program sort of unfold when we have a conservation easement put together? Those next steps, which could be really exciting to break down, talk about the wildlife benefits and the watershed and water quality and all these things that have been mentioned today. So I hope everybody here will join us and do that. We will send emails out as we hope to roll these out every couple of months. And again, the survey will pop up. So I really want to hear from you. If you have other topics you'd like us to deep dive into. Did you like this format, the drawing? We love Emma, but did you like this? Was it distracting or fun? and the time of the day, things like that. So if you can take a second to do that, we really appreciate you joining us and your valuable time and supporting MALT. That has been, you guys are our community. So thank you for that. And thank you, Catherine and Brady and Emma and everybody behind the scenes who helped make this possible.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. That's good. All right. We will end.